Have to excuse my voice. Allergies really get to me this time of the year, but I'll try to make do. Now, when a guy has lived as long as I've lived and is asked to tell his story, it should be, been there, done that, bye. So if I tried to put all that into 15 or 20 minutes, it would be hard. So I've tried to pick some of the places in the periods of my life that I went through where people had a really positive impact on me. And that's what I want to get across today to you. And I'm going to try to stick with these notes, but I don't know. I told somebody a minute ago, I may talk 5 minutes from these notes and just throw them aside and start talking. I do better when I do that. So, as Roy said, I'm LeRoy Dangeau. My family right now consists of a son, Jeff, who is an attorney for Black Hills Energy Company in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And my sweet daughter-in-law, India, who is a stay-at-home mom. She was an occupational therapist until that grandson came along, and she had her hands full from there. They only had two, a boy and a girl, but that was a handful. And that son, Zachary, is works in the corporate offices of J.B. Hunt in Northwest Arkansas. He has a business degree, uh, a graduate in business, undergraduate in business, and I hope he's doing well with that. But he's a really fine grandson. Have a granddaughter, Sarah, who is a graduate of UCA, and she is in her first semester of physical therapy at UCA. And y'all pray for her because she tells me, Granddaddy, I said, Sarah, we can find a place for you. And when she said, Granddaddy, I want to go to a big city. so, so pray that Sarah will not go to a big city. She's got a lot to learn, but she is really a smart girl, and I'm so proud of her. And so that's my family now. And of course, most of you know that my wife Betty died 4 years ago, and she's still with us. The reason that I started thinking about my life from birth to now is back in the winter, Dr. Houston Davis, the president of Central Arkansas University, that's where I graduated when it was Arkansas State Teachers College. And Dr. Davis called and said, LeRoy, we want to honor you as a distinguished alumnus. I said, well, Dr. Davis, you got the wrong guy. I've never thought of myself as being distinguished. I thought of that as people with doctor's degrees and philosophy and all that. But anyway, he said, well, somebody thinks that you're distinguished. And I said, okay, I really, uh, I'm proud of that honor. And I'm going to say some things today, that being one of them. I don't want you to take that as bragging on myself because I really try to avoid that. Because anytime I look at something that I've accomplished, I find that there were people around me that really caused me to do those things. And so, what I thought I would do would be to just kind of go through. I started really thinking about that. As Dr. Davis said, well, you're a distinguished alumnus. I said, well, and I kept thinking about things that had happened in my life, and I started with my birth. I was born in Pine Tree, Arkansas, about 15 miles from here. It's not a town, it's just a little community. And I was born into a family that owned a 40-acre plot of ground, had a house, a barn, team of mules, and 7 kids. So I was the 8th child born to my mother. She was 39 years old when I was born. And one of the sons died within a couple of weeks of birth, but I was the last one. And so when I reflected on that, I even drove out there. I know exactly where my house was. And I drove out there and thought about it. And I kept thinking, how in the world did my dad manage to make it? 1933 is when I was born. The Great Depression started in 1929. And my dad and mom raised 7 kids. There were 4 of them that did not even get a high school education. There were 2 of us, myself and an older brother, that managed to make it through college, and he became a preacher. And I don't know what I became, but anyway, he that was just absolutely amazing to me, and I just couldn't get over thinking about that. How in the world did they do that? And my mom couldn't even drive, and she nor neither my dad even had an elementary education. I mean, they just graduated from the College of Hard Knocks. And so, what really amazed me about that is how they survived. And then I tried to apply that to how I got where I am today. And I ran across a couple of good scriptures, I think, in Proverbs. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." That's pretty deep stuff. And then further in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 24 says, "A person's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand their own way?" That told me, LeRoy, you will never understand how you got where you are. You can just reflect on it and guess about it. And so that's what I started doing. And the most important thing that happened to me, besides being born, was that I accepted Christ. And we'd already moved to Forest City, and I was in the First Baptist Church there. Had a wonderful pastor, and nobody, I had good Sunday school teachers and everything. Nobody ever pressured me or tried to scare me into committing to Christ. They just didn't do that in that church. And so when I was about 11 years old, I guess, somewhere in that neighborhood, I was in Sunday morning worship. The pastor gave his sermon, and they always had an altar call. And he announced the hymn for the altar call. When that first note hit, I popped out of my seat, went to the altar. Don't know why, but I think I do. But the Lord says I don't know why. But I told the pastor I wanted to give my life to Jesus Christ. I wanted to be saved. And so that happened. It was real. I don't have to do it over again. I've done that. And so that gave me a really good start in life. And as I said, I was born in Pine Tree. And I told you what we had. We lived there till I was 3 years old, and finally Mom and Dad decided that their kids needed an education. And so we moved to Forest City. And so I went grades 1 through 12 at Forest City. And what a revelation it was when I started going to Sunday school and church there. And I started going to school in the first grade. What wonderful teachers I had. You know, we fuss about our teachers today and everything, but those ladies, and all of them were ladies, never had a man teacher till I got in high school. But those ladies treated me like I belonged to them. And they taught me things about personal care and things like that, just taught me some things out of books. One of them, I had a class with one, and she insisted we learn how to knit. We made a little deal and a weaving deal, made a little piece of cloth. What good that does, educators today would say that wasn't good. I say it was great. It taught me that sometimes you can do what you don't think you can do. And so those teachers were just wonderful to me. And so I'm thankful, eternally thankful, that I lived through the Great Depression. And some people say, well, how could you do that as bad as it was? I didn't really realize how bad it was because I had plenty to eat. My clothes were clean, everything was okay. But so I'm so glad, unaware of what I was learning. I was learning that if you work together for a goal, you can do it. And so that's what my mom and dad did. And then my older brothers and sisters fell right in line. They sacrificed a lot. They worked, they had full-time jobs to support the family instead of going to school. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. And my brothers and sisters didn't cut me any slack, boy, I'll tell you. I mean, they were good to me, but they didn't spoil me. I hear that you're the youngest child, you're spoiled. One time when I was about 10, 11 years old, I'm standing out on our front porch. And I didn't know this, but one of my older sisters was standing in the doorway behind me, behind the screen door. She couldn't be seen from the street. The neighborhood bully comes walking by out in the street, and we exchanged a few words. And he said, you just come out in the street. And he told me what he would do to me, And I'm standing there, I heard this voice behind me say, if you don't go out there, I'm going to whip your rear end. And I believed her. She was a good athlete. She was the athlete in the family. She was good. And she loved me dearly. I know that. And later on, well, I went out in the street. I'll tell you the results of that. And the guy backed down. And I think he heard my sister. Because he certainly wasn't afraid of me. But then several years later, when we were in junior high, I had to deal with that guy again. And this time, I used that lesson that my sister taught me. I didn't give him time to tell me what he was going to do to me. I knocked him flat on his rear end. And that was it. So anyway, that's kind of the way my brothers and sisters taught me. They taught me, don't start a fight, but defend yourself. Never back down from anything, whether it's a fight or a job. And then I had some great men in my life in junior high and high school. And this was shortly after the war, World War II. And Forest City had dropped junior high football during that time. And they started it back when I was in the 8th grade. And there was a World War II veteran named Bill Irving. He was a decorated hero, wounded many times in the war. Real tough guy, great athlete when he was in high school. He coached my 8th grade junior high football team. And so I had visions of And on the sandlot, I could throw the ball, I could catch the ball, I could run, do all that. The first thing he did with me was made a lineman out of me, a center. And I didn't like that at all. I didn't say anything. And then one day we were practicing kicking extra points, and I'm the center. And I'm thinking, my evil thoughts, if I can't do this, I'll get to play something else. And so I made a kind of bad snap to the holder. Nothing was said. Next snap, I rolled it back there. I said, surely you'll take me out of here. He said, Dangeau, the next time you roll one back here, I'm going to kick your rear end through the goal. And that stuck with me, too. I didn't argue about that. I made an attitude adjustment. And lo and behold, that's the only position I ever played. And I got a college education snapping the football and playing linebacker. So Coach Irving knew what he was doing with me a lot better than I did. And then when after I graduated from high school, I had some offers in some small colleges, and I went and visited some. And everybody I saw at that time, I weighed about 165 pounds, 6'2", like I am now, and huge lineman. Then back then, 250 was huge. And so I had my doubts about whether I wanted to go try to play. And so that summer, I was still having doubts. And one day, late in the summer, Coach Irving came and looked me up. And he said, Dan, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to get a job. He said, well, Coach Montgomery called from state teachers and said, you need to be there now. And I said, well, Coach, I'm not big enough to play over there. And he said, he thinks you're big enough. I think you're big enough. Pack your suitcase and go. So I went. And so Coach Irving had a lot to do with my early life. He was 165. I was only 17. By the time I turned 18, I was 190. So they feed good at state teachers college. So that got me to college, and but I have to tell this one a non-athletic thing. My high school principal was Lewis Hawley, and Carl probably knows his son Eldon Hawley. Eldon was a center at Forest City for many years behind me, but Mr. Hawley was the principal. I'm taking plain geometry. I go about 2 weeks, and we have a test every day. The highest grade I had was a D. So I said, well, I can't do this. I'm going to take general math. So I went to Mr. Hawley's office. He said, what you want, Dangeau? I said, well, I'm going to drop plain geometry and take general math. He said, you are? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to go back in that plain geometry class and ask that teacher what you have to do to pass that course, and you're going to do it. I didn't dispute his word. I went back, and she made me memorize all those logarithms and theorems and all that stuff. I mean, she worked my rear end off, and I ended up with a B average in that course. So, Mr. Hawley, I have to say that he had a major part in my path. And then when I got to SCC, I found that was really good too. There were a lot of instructors that took an interest in me. I had a really good looking women's PE teacher. And I didn't have any courses under her, but every time she would see me walking on the campus, she would say, Dangeau, don't walk so slew-footed. So they were noticing everything. I couldn't hide from anything out of that. So it was a good experience. And when I Graduated from college, I went in the military for 2 years. I wanted to coach, and so I volunteered for the draft in June. I graduated like June the 20th and June 25th. I was in the Army because I wanted to get out in 2 years so I could start coaching in that fall. And so I volunteered for the draft. And when I came out of the service, James Perry was that guy that was my junior high basketball coach at Forest City, and he was now in administration. He was superintendent of schools at Wilson, Arkansas, and he called me and said, "Your job is waiting for you." And so I accepted that coaching job, and the head coach there was Bob Courtway from Wynn. His wife was the former Betty Suggs. She was from Wynn. They were both ASTC grads, and they were the model of a Christian family. And so they kind of took me, and I think, 23 years old. So when Mr. Perry offered me a job, I said, "Well, when do you want me to start?" He said, "Well, I'm going to put you on a 12-month contract." And I said, "Well, you want to come right now?" I just gotten out of the Army. He said, "No, I want you to stay in Forest City and get all that running around and celebrating out of your system before you come up here." He knew me too. So so that I did, and I went to Wilson, and and that was some of the best years of my life. I was there 7 years, and I coached some of the best young men that I've ever seen. And there are several of them now that are in their mid to late 70s, and I hear from them almost weekly. The one I had the most trouble with getting him to do right was the smartest guy on the team, the most athletic, but we had trouble. And here back a couple of years ago, he, by the way, he went to Vanderbilt on a football scholarship, became a doctor, and practiced down in South Arkansas and retired. And this was after he retired. He called me one night, said, "Coach, I want to tell you some good news." And I said, "Well, what's that, Ralph?" He said, "I've got a grandson playing football at Rogers." And he said, "That guy can play." And so he bragged on about the grandson. So I started watching him on YouTube, and Ralph was right. He could play. And then when that boy's senior year in the spring, got another call from Ralph. He said, "Coach, got really good news." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "My son has been offered a scholarship to play football at SMU." This was, well, it was during football season, I believe. Yeah, and they offered him during football season. And then the kid tore up and he didn't get the scholarship. But I was just blown away that Ralph would call me. but but evidently those conflicts we had built a relationship with that guy. And there are guys scattered all over Arkansas that played for me, and we still stay in contact. And so those were some really formative years, and the people in Wilson kind of treated me like a son. I was 23 years old, and they kind of took me in, took care of me. And while I was there, one of my college teammates was coaching at Luxor, Arkansas, which is about 20 miles north of Wilson. And in 1958, Ray started, every time he'd see me, he'd say, "Hey, we've got a new English teacher. We just graduated from Ole Miss. She's in her first job. She's single. Boy, you need to come up here and meet her." I said, "Yeah, I bet." I wasn't much into blind dates, you know. I like to pick my own. And so he just kept on. Ray just kept on. And finally, during the Christmas holiday, and he told me her name. And the name was kind of familiar to me, but I had never met her, even though she grew up in Wynn, I grew up in Forest City. And so when we were both at our parents' house for Christmas, and so one afternoon I called Betty and asked if she'd go out with me and have a cup of coffee, a piece of pie. Yeah, so I picked her up and we went to Marlowe's right down the street here. There was a restaurant, had coffee and lemon icebox pie. So we talked a while and she agreed that she would date me when we got back to work. And so in January of 1959, we got pretty serious dating, you know. We hit it off pretty good. Man, I was blown away the first time I saw her. And so we dated a few weeks, a month or so. And finally and one of our favorite things was going to a movie. Wasn't much else to do. So I would go pick her up and we'd go to Blythe and go to a movie, come back to the restaurant, have a cup of coffee and a piece of lemon icebox pie. We just did that for a few months and finally we decided that we would get married. And Betty said, "Well, you'll have to go with me to Wynn and you'll have to tell my parents. You'll have to ask their blessing." I said, "Well, I can do that." So we came to Wynn and went to her house, her parents' house, and we're sitting in the kitchen table, and her dad was sitting beside her right across the table from me. Her mother was sitting over here. So we talked a while, and Mr. Harold looked at me right now, and he said, I think he kind of was suspected what I was up to. And he said, "Well, what did you guys want to talk to us about?" I said, "Well, Betty and I want to get married, and we want your blessing." He didn't say a word. He just kept looking at me. I heard her mother say, "Well, when are y'all planning to get married?" And I said, "Well, we have to get married pretty soon, as soon as we can." I thought she was going to have a heart attack. And I thought, golly, I said that wrong. So I said, what I mean is that I have a football coaching clinic the second week in August. The 20th of August, football practice starts. And we have to do this before football starts. And so we worked all that out and we decided to get married August 2nd, 1959. And we did that. Then when that happened, when I talked Betty into marrying me, that was the second best decision I ever made. She was absolutely the perfect woman for my personality. And my personality, I have a pretty quick temper. And those of you that knew Betty knew how level and steady she was. And so there, it kind of got me going on the right track again. I was a little bit off track at that time. Nothing real bad, but I was off track. And that first year that we were married, one of my players went home and talked to his mother about me. And she came to me and she said, "Coach," she was doing the right things with me. So if I get boring and y'all think gosh, it's 11 o'clock. I got to go. Been there, done that. I'm not through yet. Okay. You're doing great. I want to tell you a few more things that happened in my life that were very significant, and I give the credit to Betty for most of that. And but a little funny story about her. A few weeks after we were married, one day I said, Betty, how would you like to go to a movie tonight? She said, that'd be great. So I said, we'll go to the movie, come back and have a cup of coffee and a piece of lemon ice pie. She put her hands on her hip and said, LeRoy, I don't even like lemon ice pie. So I wonder who fooled who in that deal. But anyway, I have just had a great life. I can't complain at all about it. And our son Jeff was born in 1960, and then we started making serious decisions. And when I think about those decisions that we made, I think about Yogi Berra, my favorite baseball player. One of his sayings was, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. He didn't say which one. He said, don't mess around, take something. You know, and I thought that was really good. So another thing he said was, somebody asked him how you got to be such a good hitter. What do you do? And he said, I see the ball and I hit it. Don't overcook something, you know. So that, then I get to the serious part. In 1964, we made a decision to get out of school business. I did. I was going to get out of school business. Betty was going to stay in it. And I applied for a job with Firestone, who had headquarters in Memphis. And they offered me a really good job. And one of my friends had introduced me over there, and he had showed me his income tax return form. And he was making several times more than I was making. And so anyway, they agreed to hire me, and I would go to work for them as soon as school was out. In the meantime, in late spring that year, Mr. Harold's business partner, they were partners in a parts store here, and the business partner dropped dead with a heart attack. And I'll give this to my father-in-law. He never tried to talk me to get out of coaching. He never tried to talk me into going into business. But he came to me and he said, LeRoy, you've already made a decision to get out of coaching. I've lost my business partner. Would you like to come and work for me? And I did. About 2 years later, a parts store in Forest City, Jim Hausler's Auto Parts. I don't know whether y'all remember that or not, but that came up for sale, and Mr. Harold decided that I didn't have any money, but we would buy that store, and I would go down there and run it, and I would end up owning the store. So we made that decision, and we did that. Went down there and worked almost a year, and my father-in-law went to work one morning, and about 8 o'clock he had a massive heart attack and died. And he was 59 years old. So Betty had a brother and a sister. The brother was a senior in college at Arkansas State. The sister lived in San Francisco. Miss Harold knew nothing about the parts business. So I decided to stay and run that store here, and I had a really good man at Forest City. So we operated those two parts stores. Miss Harold had a nice income for the rest of her life. And then in 1994, we decided that I was able to sell the stores and retire. And so we did that, and then my good friend George Owens came to me and said, "LeRoy, you're selling your parts stores. We need you to run for cross-county judge. We're having trouble keeping our hospital open. We're about to lose it." And I said, "George, I never thought about getting into politics." He said, "Well, just think about it." So I mulled it over, and one night we're sitting in the den, Betty and I are sitting in the den, and I'm kind of mumbling about whether to take on that task or not. Betty finally got enough, and she said, "LeRoy, I know you can do that job. You know you can do that job. And you know you want to do that job. So call George and tell him you'll do it." So that's how I got in politics and served 6 years. And then my good friend Jim Looker was in the House of Representatives. He term limited out after 6 years. And so I ran for his job, and I term limited out after 6 years. And so I had some really good experiences in politics. It wasn't like it is now. I had a bunch of good things. Worked with a lot of really good men, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, whatever. When we saw a need, we went to work on it, and it was a great 6 years for me. So some things that I have gathered after looking over my life are some important things, I think. And right on the top of the list is the importance of people working together for a common goal. Starting with my family, raising 7 kids on a 40-acre plot of ground. And then another thing is, when you're faced with a difficult situation, give it your best shot. That applies to my family. It applies to with my football, and many other things. Third thing, respect authority, respect yourself, and respect others. These things build character, and character trumps everything. That's what happens when we rely on the Bible. It builds character. And in, we've had some troubling times, Carl. We talked about it in Sunday school here with our church. We've had some troubling times. Let me leave you with this thought that comes from 2 Corinthians 4:8. It says, "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed." So those things, I think, I learned the importance of when I was living my life. And I did not realize that until I started reflecting back on where I started and where I ended up. And so, I've had a really good experience because of the tornado that destroyed our church building. Because when I started coming with this group, I just get a shot in the arm every time I come. It is just perfect for me. And I want us to keep doing that. And we have a great opportunity to build something here because we have a multi-generational church. We have little bitty kids right on up all the way up to Jerry Colonel over there. He's a year older than me. We're the last ones. We're holding on. Sybil's pretty close. She's the same age Betty was, good friend of hers. So we have a great opportunity here, and I compare that to building a good football program, Madden. The way you build a good program is you start with the little ones and you teach them the fundamentals. fundamentals, block, tackle, right on up. And when they get to be juniors and seniors, they're state champs. And so I just think that we have a wonderful opportunity here to do something with this church. And so let's do it. And I appreciate you being an attentive audience. I'm sorry I went over.